The dust from the stolen wagon still hung in the air when Katherine Zimmerman realized everything she owned in the world was gone, and her wedding was supposed to happen in 3 days. She stood frozen in the middle of Main Street in Laramie, Wyoming, watching the trail of dust disappear over the eastern ridge where the thieves had vanished with her dowry chest. The September afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but Katherine felt cold all over. Inside that chest had been everything her father had saved for 15 years. Everything that was supposed to secure her future with Thomas Garrett, the wealthy rancher's son who had agreed to marry her. $5,000 in gold coins, her mother's silver candlesticks, the deed to a small property in Pennsylvania that had been in her family for generations, and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. All of it, gone in the span of 5 minutes while she had been inside the general store picking up the last of her wedding supplies. "Miss Zimmerman, are you all right?" The voice came from behind her, deep and concerned, tinged with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent considerable time in Texas before making his way north. Katherine turned slowly, her green eyes wide with shock, her hands trembling as they clutched the small package of lace she had just purchased for her wedding dress. The man standing before her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn shirt. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, almost gray in the harsh sunlight, and they held genuine worry as they studied her face. "They took everything," Katherine whispered, her voice barely audible. "The wagon, the chest, everything my father saved." The cowboy's jaw tightened and he glanced in the direction the thieves had gone. "How many were there?" "3 men. Maybe 4, I don't know, it happened so fast." Katherine's legs felt weak and she swayed slightly. The cowboy's hand shot out to steady her elbow, his grip firm but gentle. "Let me get you somewhere to sit down," he said, guiding her toward the wooden bench outside the general store. "I am Everett Sullivan. I work the cattle drive routes mostly, but I have been staying in town for a few weeks helping old Mr. Patterson with his ranch." Katherine sank onto the bench, her mind racing. "I am Katherine Zimmerman. My father is the new school teacher. We arrived here 2 months ago from Pennsylvania." She looked up at him, desperation creeping into her voice. "My wedding is in 3 days. Thomas, my intended, his family expected that dowry. His father made it very clear that it was part of the arrangement." Everett's expression darkened slightly. "An arrangement? That does not sound much like a love match." Katherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or anger, she was not sure. "That is how things are done, Mr. Sullivan. Thomas is a good match. His family owns the second-largest ranch in the county. My father's position is secure because of this engagement without that dowry." She trailed off, not wanting to voice the terrible possibilities that were crowding her mind. "Without it, what?" Everett pressed, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. "What happens?" "Thomas's father will call off the wedding. Thomas will not go against his father's wishes. My father could lose his position. We have nowhere else to go, no other prospects." Katherine's voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. She had been raised to be composed, to maintain dignity no matter the circumstances, but this was too much. Everett stood abruptly and looked toward the sheriff's office down the street. "Have you reported this to Sheriff Coleman?" "Not yet." "I was trying to understand what happened, trying to think of what to do." Katherine stood as well, her legs steadier now though her heart still pounded frantically. "But what good will it do? Those men are long gone by now. Maybe, maybe not." Everett's eyes had taken on a determined gleam. "Which direction did they head?" "East, toward the ridge." "That is interesting. Most thieves would head south toward the Colorado border or west toward the mountains. East takes you into open prairie, harder to hide. Everett seemed to be thinking out loud more than speaking to her directly. Could be they have a hideout out that way, or they are planning to circle back around once the initial search dies down. Katherine felt a tiny flicker of hope kindle in her chest. You think there is a chance of getting it back? Everett looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. I am going to do everything I can to help you, Miss Zimmerman. But first, we need to tell the sheriff and get some men organized. How much time before sunset? Katherine glanced at the sun's position. Maybe 4 hours. Then we need to move fast. Everett offered her his arm. Come on, let us go see Coleman. Sheriff Benjamin Coleman was a grizzled man in his 50s with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen too much violence in his years wearing the badge. He listened to Katherine's story with a grave expression, occasionally jotting notes in a leather-bound book that sat on his desk. 3 or 4 men, you say? Can you describe any of them? Katherine closed her eyes, trying to recall details through the panic that had gripped her. One had a red bandana. Another wore a brown hat with a silver band. They were shouting to each other, but I could not hear what they said over the sound of the horses. The wagon they took belonged to Mr. Henderson. I had borrowed it to transport my things from the boarding house to the church where I was going to store them until after the wedding. Coleman nodded slowly. Henderson already reported the wagon stolen, said he left it outside the livery for just 10 minutes. He looked at Everett. Sullivan, I know that look in your eye. You are thinking about going after them. Someone needs to, Everett said evenly. That trail is only going to get colder. I can put together a posse, but it will take time. Most of the men are out working their claims or tending their ranches this time of day. Coleman drummed his fingers on the desk. Could be tomorrow morning before we have enough men to ride out safely. Tomorrow might be too late, Everett argued. If they have a hideout, they will divide up the goods and scatter. Your best chance is to catch them tonight, maybe surprise them at their camp. That is mighty dangerous work for one man, Coleman said, his tone cautionary. Then I will take 2 or 3 others who can be ready within the hour. Everett turned to Katherine. Miss Zimmerman, where is your father right now? At the schoolhouse, preparing lessons for Monday. Katherine's mind was reeling. She could hardly believe this stranger was willing to risk his life to help her, someone he had met mere minutes ago. You should go to him, tell him what happened. Stay with him until you hear from me or the sheriff. Everett's voice was gentle but firm. Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? We board with Mrs. Henderson on Oak Street. Good. That is a respectable place. Everett looked back at Coleman. I am going to need to borrow a fresh horse. Mine has been working all day and needs rest. Coleman sighed heavily. You are determined to do this fool thing, are you not? Yes, sir, I am. Then take the bay mare in the 3rd stall. She is fast and sure-footed. But Sullivan, you listen to me. If you catch up to those men and they outnumber you, you do not engage. You mark their location and come back for the posse. You understand me? No heroics. Everett nodded, but Katherine noticed he did not actually agree to the sheriff's terms. He simply touched the brim of his hat and said, I will be back before you know it. As he turned to leave, Katherine found herself reaching out, catching his sleeve. Mr. Sullivan, why are you doing this? You do not know me. This is not your problem. Everett looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. For a moment, something passed between them, something Katherine could not quite name but felt deep in her chest. Maybe it is not my problem, Miss Zimmerman, but it is the right thing to do. Sometimes that is reason enough. He paused, then added quietly, and something about this whole situation does not sit right with me. A man who would call off a wedding over money is not much of a man at all. Then he was gone. his boots echoing on the wooden floorboards as he strode out of the sheriff's office and down the street toward the livery. Katherine stood there for a long moment, her hand still extended as if she could hold onto his presence a little longer. Sheriff Coleman cleared his throat, drawing her attention back to him. "That is a good man there, Miss Zimmerman. Proud, maybe a bit too brave for his own good, but good through and through. I have known Everett Sullivan for near about 3 years now, and I have never seen him back down from helping someone in need." Coleman stood and walked around his desk. "Now, let me escort you to the schoolhouse. Your father will want to know what happened." The walk to the schoolhouse was short, just 2 blocks down Main Street and 1 block over onto a quiet residential street lined with cottonwood trees. The school itself was a simple wooden structure painted white, with a bell tower on top and large windows that let in plenty of light for the children to read by. Katherine's father, Martin Zimmerman, was inside arranging primers on the shelves when Katherine and the sheriff entered. Martin Zimmerman was a slender man in his late 40s, with thinning brown hair and spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose. He had the distracted air of someone whose mind was always partly in a book, but when he saw the expression on his daughter's face and the sheriff standing beside her, all that distraction vanished. "Katherine, what has happened?" Katherine told the story again, and with each retelling it felt more surreal, as if it had happened to someone else. Her father's face grew paler with each detail, and by the time she finished, he had sunk into his desk chair, his head in his hands. $5,000, he said hollowly. 15 years of saving, your mother's things. He looked up at Katherine, his eyes glistening. "Thomas's father will never agree to the wedding now." "Maybe that is not such a terrible thing," Sheriff Coleman said carefully. "If a man only wants to marry your daughter for money, then perhaps he is not the right match." Martin shook his head. "You do not understand. Samuel Garrett secured this teaching position for me. He has influence with the town council. If he decides to withdraw his support—" He did not need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear. Katherine felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. "So I am simply a bargaining chip, a way to secure your position." "Katherine, that is not fair," her father said wearily. "I am trying to provide for us. After your mother died, after we lost everything in the fire back home, this was our fresh start. Thomas is a decent young man. He would provide well for you. But does he love me?" Katherine heard herself ask, and the question hung in the air like smoke. Her father had no answer for that. Sheriff Coleman shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Well, folks, I should be getting back to my office. I will send word the moment I hear anything from Sullivan or if we organize a posse to ride out. In the meantime, try to get some rest. These things have a way of working themselves out." But Katherine doubted that very much. After the sheriff left, she and her father sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the rustling of the cottonwood leaves outside the windows. "I should go see Thomas," Katherine said finally. "Tell him what happened before he hears it from someone else." "That is probably wise," her father agreed, though he looked miserable at the prospect. "Do you want me to come with you?" Katherine shook her head. "No, this is something I need to do myself." The Garrett Ranch was 3 miles outside of town, a sprawling operation with hundreds of head of cattle, and a large, impressive house that spoke of wealth and established power. Katherine borrowed Mrs. Henderson's mare for the ride out, and with each mile her dread grew heavier. Thomas Garrett was waiting on the porch when she arrived, almost as if he had been expecting her. He was a handsome man in his mid-20s, with carefully groomed blonde hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place on a working ranch. As Katherine dismounted and walked toward him, she tried to see him through fresh eyes, tried to remember why she had agreed to this engagement in the first place. He was polite, certainly. Educated, well-spoken. But as she looked at him now, standing there with his arms crossed and an expression of irritation on his face, she realized she did not know him at all. In the 3 months since their engagement had been arranged, they had spent perhaps a dozen hours in each other's company, always chaperoned, always formal. "Katherine, what brings you out here? We were supposed to meet tomorrow to go over the final wedding arrangements." Thomas's tone was pleasant enough, but there was an edge to it that made Katherine's stomach tighten. "Thomas, something has happened, something terrible." She climbed the steps to the porch, and he gestured for her to sit in one of the rocking chairs. She remained standing. "My dowry was stolen this afternoon. The entire chest, everything in it. Some men took it while I was in the general store." Thomas's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, concern, and then something that looked almost like calculation. "Stolen, all of it?" "Yes. The sheriff is investigating, and there is a cowboy named Everett Sullivan who rode out to try to track them down, but I do not know if they will be able to recover it." Katherine twisted her hands together. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly." "I see." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out over the ranch lands. "This is quite unfortunate." "Unfortunate?" Katherine felt a flash of anger. "Thomas, this is everything my family had. My mother's belongings, my father's life savings." "Yes, of course, I understand that." Thomas turned back to her, and his expression was sympathetic but distant. "But you must understand my position as well. My father made certain agreements with your father regarding the marriage settlement. Without that dowry, those agreements cannot be fulfilled." Katherine felt as if she had been struck. "Are you saying you want to call off the wedding?" "I am saying I need to discuss this with my father. He handles all the family business matters." Thomas took a step closer, and his voice softened slightly. "Katherine, please do not think poorly of me. This is simply how these things work. Marriage is a business arrangement as much as a personal one. Without the financial component, the arrangement becomes unbalanced." "Unbalanced," Katherine repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "What about love, Thomas? What about the promises we made to each other?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "We barely know each other, Katherine. Be reasonable. Love would have come in time, perhaps, but the foundation of any successful marriage is stability and financial security." Katherine felt something crack open inside her, something she had been keeping carefully closed for months. "You are right. We do not know each other at all, and I am beginning to think that is a blessing." She turned and walked back down the porch steps toward her horse. "Katherine, wait." Thomas followed her. "Do not be rash. Let me speak with my father. Perhaps we can work something out." "Work something out?" Katherine mounted the horse and looked down at him. "I am not a business deal, Thomas. I am a person. And I deserve to be with someone who sees me as more than a financial transaction." She wheeled the horse around and kicked it into a gallop, not caring that it was unladylike, not caring what Thomas or anyone else thought. Tears streamed down her face as she rode back toward town, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of anger and, strangely, relief. Something about losing everything had made her see clearly for the first time in months. She had been sleepwalking toward a marriage that would have made her miserable, all in the name of security and propriety. By the time she reached Laramie, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Katherine returned the horse to Mrs. Henderson and walked slowly back to the boarding house, her mind churning with thoughts and emotions she could barely sort through. Mrs. Henderson was a kindly woman in her 60s who ran the boarding house with her daughter, Ruth. When Katherine entered, both women were in the parlor and they looked up with expressions of concern. "Oh, my dear, we heard what happened," Mrs. Henderson said, rising to embrace Katherine. "What a terrible thing! Are you all right?" Katherine found herself clinging to the older woman, suddenly exhausted. "I do not know. Everything is such a mess. Come, sit down. Ruth made stew for dinner. You need to eat something." Mrs. Henderson guided Katherine to the dining table where several other boarders were already eating. They offered their sympathies and Katherine nodded her thanks, but she could barely taste the food. Her father arrived shortly after, looking drawn and worried. "I went to see Samuel Garrett," he said quietly, sitting beside Katherine. "He confirmed what I feared. Without the dowry, he wants to dissolve the engagement agreement." "Thomas already told me as much," Katherine said, surprised at how calm she felt. "He could not wait to wash his hands of me." Martin reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. "I am so sorry, Katherine. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I thought security and stability were the most important things after everything we lost. But perhaps I was wrong to push you toward this match." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were for her father, who looked so defeated. "You were trying to protect me, I know that, and I went along with it because I thought it was what I should do, what was expected of me." She took a shaky breath. "But Papa, I was not happy. I was not looking forward to my wedding day, I was dreading it." Her father looked shocked. "Why did you not say something?" "Because I did not want to disappoint you. Because I thought maybe I was wrong to want more, to hope for something different." Katherine wiped her eyes. "But today, when that dowry was stolen, when I watched everything disappear, I felt terrible. But I also felt something else. I felt free." They sat together in silence, processing the upheaval of the day. The other boarders had tactfully left the dining room, giving them privacy. Outside, darkness had fallen, and the sounds of Laramie at night drifted through the windows. Horses passing by, music from the saloon down the street, voices calling out greetings to one another. "So what do we do now?" Martin asked finally. "I do not know," Katherine admitted. "But we will figure it out. Together." That night, Katherine lay in her small room under the eaves of the boarding house, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about Everett Sullivan riding out into the gathering darkness, tracking dangerous men for the sake of a stranger. She thought about his words. "A man who would call off a wedding over money is not much of a man at all." She thought about the way his eyes had held hers, the steadiness and warmth she had seen there. She tried to tell herself it was foolish to dwell on a man she had met for mere minutes, a drifter who would likely move on to the next town once this was over. But her mind kept returning to him anyway, wondering if he was safe, if he had found the thieves, if he would keep his promise to return. Somewhere in the deep hours of the night, she finally fell into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with dust trails and blue eyes and a voice saying, "Sometimes that is reason enough." Morning came too soon, gray and cool with the promise of autumn in the air. Katherine dressed quickly and went downstairs, where she found her father already awake, nursing a cup of coffee in the parlor. "Any word?" she asked, though she knew the answer before he shook his head. "Nothing yet. I imagine if Sullivan found anything, we would have heard by now." Katherine poured herself coffee and stood by the window, watching the town wake up. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, sweeping their stoops. A wagon rattled by loaded with supplies. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary, as if her entire world had not shifted on its axis yesterday. "I suppose I should go to the church and explain to Reverend Matthews that the wedding is off," Katherine said quietly, "and return the lace I bought for the dress. Katherine, I am truly sorry about all of this." "I know, Papa, so am I, but maybe things happen for a reason." She tried to smile, though it felt fragile on her face. "Maybe this is not an ending. Maybe it is a beginning." Before her father could respond, there was a commotion in the street outside. Voices were calling out, excited and urgent. Katherine rushed to the door and threw it open, her heart leaping into her throat. A group of riders was coming down Main Street, and in the center was Everett Sullivan, dusty and weary but sitting tall in the saddle. Behind him, tied to their horses with ropes, were three men who looked bruised and furious. And bringing up the rear was Mr. Henderson's wagon, covered with a tarp. Katherine flew down the steps and into the street, heedless of propriety or caution. Everett saw her coming and dismounted, his movements stiff as if he had been riding for many hours without rest. "Mr. Sullivan, you found them." Katherine stopped just short of running into him, suddenly aware of the crowd gathering around them. "I did, Miss Zimmerman. And I believe everything in that wagon belongs to you." Everett's voice was hoarse, and there was a cut above his eyebrow that had bled and dried, but he was smiling. Sheriff Coleman came striding up, looking astonished. "Sullivan, I will be damned. You actually did it." "They made camp about 15 miles east, just like I thought. Figured they would lay low for a day or two before moving the goods." Everett gestured to the captured men. They were not expecting anyone to come after them so fast. There were only 3 of them. Katherine asked, moving toward the wagon. "The 4th one was smarter than these 3. He took his share and rode off south before I got there, but he did not take much, mostly some cash. Everything else is still in the chest." Everett helped Katherine climb into the wagon bed and pulled back the tarp. There, dusty but intact, was her dowry chest. Katherine's hands shook as she opened it, and relief flooded through her. The gold coins were there, the silver candlesticks, the deed, the pearl necklace. Everything her father had worked for, everything her mother had treasured. "It is all here," she whispered, then looked up at Everett. "I cannot believe you did this. You risked your life for this." Everett shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "Like I said, it was the right thing to do." The sheriff was already hauling the 3 thieves off their horses and toward the jail. The crowd that had gathered was buzzing with excitement, everyone talking at once about the daring recovery. Katherine's father had joined them, his face a mixture of relief and amazement as he inspected the chest. "Mr. Sullivan, I do not know how to thank you," Martin said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is everything to us. You have saved our future." But Everett was not looking at Martin. He was looking at Katherine, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Miss Zimmerman, might I speak with you privately for a moment?" Katherine nodded, very aware of her father's curious gaze and the interested looks from the crowd. She climbed down from the wagon, and Everett led her a short distance away, to the relative privacy of the space between 2 buildings. "I need to tell you something," Everett said, and he looked more nervous than he had facing down 3 armed thieves. "Last night, while I was tracking those men, I did a lot of thinking about what you said about your wedding and the dowry and all of it." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "And I realized something. I realized that I was angry. Not just because of the theft, but because the idea of you marrying someone who only wanted you for money made me furious." Katherine's heart was beating so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "Why would that make you angry?" "Because even in the short time I spent talking to you yesterday, I could see how remarkable you are. Your strength, your spirit, the way you hold yourself together even when everything is falling apart." Everett took a step closer. "And I kept thinking that any man who cannot see that, who needs a pile of gold to make him want to marry you, is a damn fool. Pardon my language." "I called off the engagement," Katherine blurted out, then felt her cheeks burn. "Or rather, Thomas called it off, but I would have done it anyway." "You were right about him. He is not much of a man at all." Everett's expression lightened with something that looked like hope. "Is that so?" "Yes, and I have been thinking too, about what you said about doing the right thing being reason enough, about how you rode out into danger for a stranger." Katherine took a breath, feeling bold and reckless and more alive than she had in months. "I have been thinking about how I have not been able to stop thinking about you." Everett laughed, a surprised, delighted sound. "Well, that is good to hear because I have not stopped thinking about you either. All night through everything, you were on my mind." They stood there, in the narrow space between buildings, while the sounds of the town carried on around them. Katherine knew people were probably wondering where they had gone, knew her father would have questions, knew that this was all moving impossibly fast. But she did not care. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "I do not know," Everett admitted. "I am not a wealthy man, Miss Zimmerman. I am just a cowboy. I work cattle drives and hire myself out to ranchers who need extra hands. I do not have land or prospects or much of anything except my horse and my saddle and a strong back. But I would very much like to get to know you properly." "With your permission, of course, and your father's." Katherine felt a smile spreading across her face, genuine and warm. "I think I would like that very much, Mr. Sullivan." "Everett," he said. "Please call me Everett." "Everett," Katherine repeated, liking the way his name felt in her mouth. "And you must call me Katherine." "Katherine," Everett said softly, and the way he said it made it sound like something precious. They walked back to the wagon together, and if they were standing closer than propriety strictly allowed, neither of them cared. Martin Zimmerman was supervising as several men loaded the Dowry chest into another wagon to transport it to the bank for safekeeping. He looked up as they approached, and his eyes moved between his daughter's glowing face and Everett's hopeful expression. "Papa, Mr. Sullivan, Everett has asked permission to court me properly," Katherine said, deciding that honesty was the best approach. "I have told him I would be amenable to such an arrangement, but naturally we want your blessing." Martin looked at Everett for a long moment, and Katherine held her breath. Her father was a conventional man, a careful man. He valued security and stability. Everett Sullivan represented none of those things, but then Martin surprised her. "Mr. Sullivan, you rode out alone into the night to recover something precious to my daughter, asking nothing in return. You risked your life because it was the right thing to do. I think that tells me more about your character than any amount of land or money ever could." He extended his hand. "You have my blessing and my gratitude." Everett shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will treat your daughter with the respect and care she deserves." "See that you do," Martin said, but he was smiling. The next few days passed in a strange blur of activity. The news of the recovered dowry and Katherine's broken engagement spread through Laramie like wildfire. Some people sympathized, some gossiped, and some, like Mrs. Henderson and her daughter Ruth, were openly delighted by the turn of events. That Thomas Garrett was always too pleased with himself, Ruth confided to Katherine as they sat together in the boarding house parlor, mending linens. And everyone knew the engagement was his father's idea more than his. "You are better off without him." Katherine had to agree. The sense of relief she felt grew stronger each day. No more forcing herself to smile through awkward conversations with Thomas. No more dreading the life that lay ahead of her as a ranch wife to a man who saw her as an obligation. Instead, she had something to look forward to. Everett called on her every afternoon, properly chaperoned by either her father or Mrs. Henderson. They would walk through town, talking about everything and nothing. Katherine learned that Everett was 26 years old, originally from a small town in Texas. He had left home at 18 after his parents died in a cholera outbreak, and he had been working his way north ever since, taking jobs where he could find them, never staying in one place for too long. "I guess I was always looking for something," Everett told her as they sat together on a bench outside the general store, watching the afternoon sun slant across the street. "I just did not know what it was until I met you." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. "That is quite a romantic thing to say, Everett. I mean it, though. I have spent 8 years drifting, never putting down roots because nothing ever felt right, but being here with you, it feels different." He looked at her, his blue eyes serious. "It feels like home." "Even though we have only known each other for less than a week?" Katherine asked, though her heart was singing. "Sometimes you just know," Everett said simply. "When something is right, you feel it in your bones." Katherine did know. Against all logic and reason, she knew. This man, this kind, brave, honest man, was someone she could build a life with. Not because of obligation or arrangement, but because of genuine feeling, genuine connection. But there were practical matters to consider. Katherine's father broached the subject one evening after Everett had left. "Katherine, I am happy that you and Mr. Sullivan are getting to know each other. Truly I am, but we need to discuss what this means for your future." Martin set down the book he had been reading. Everett has made it clear that he does not have much in the way of material wealth. "If you choose to pursue this relationship, life will be harder than it would have been with Thomas Garrett." "I know that, Papa," Katherine said quietly, "but I would rather face a hard life with a good man than an easy life with someone who does not truly care for me." "I understand. But I want to make sure you understand what you might be giving up. The Garretts have withdrawn their support, as expected. The town council has been understanding, but there are murmurs that perhaps they need someone more established in the teaching position. I may need to look for another post, perhaps in another town." Katherine felt a jolt of alarm. "They would let you go just because the engagement fell through. That is not fair." "Fair or not, it is the reality. Samuel Garrett has significant influence here." Martin sighed. "But perhaps it is time for another fresh start anyway. We have done it before. We can do it again." "Wait," Katherine said, an idea forming in her mind. "The dowry. It is still intact. What if we used it differently, not as a marriage settlement but as an investment? What if we used it to help you start your own school, or to buy property where Everett could start a ranch?" Martin looked thoughtful. "That is an interesting idea, but such endeavors take time and planning. And in the meantime, we need to make sure we have a place to live and income to support ourselves." Over the next week, Katherine and Everett spent more and more time together, and with each passing day, Katherine fell more deeply in love. She loved the way Everett listened when she spoke, truly listened, his full attention on her words. She loved how he made her laugh with stories from his years on the cattle trails. She loved his quiet strength, the way he helped Mrs. Henderson repair a loose step without being asked, the way he treated everyone with respect regardless of their station. And Everett was falling just as hard. Katherine could see it in the way he looked at her, in the gentle touch of his hand on her elbow when he helped her over rough ground, in the way his voice softened when he said her name. They were courting at a pace that would have seemed scandalous under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. They had been thrown together by fate and theft and upheaval, and somehow it felt right. 2 weeks after the dowry was recovered, Everett asked to speak with Katherine's father formally. They met in the parlor of the boarding house, with Katherine present at her own insistence. "Mr. Zimmerman, I know this is going to seem fast, probably too fast by conventional standards," Everett began, looking more nervous than Katherine had ever seen him. "But I want to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage." Martin leaned back in his chair, studying the younger man. "You have known each other for only 2 weeks, Mr. Sullivan." "I know, sir. And I know I do not have much to offer in terms of material wealth, but I love your daughter. I love her strength and her kindness and her courage. I love the way she sees the world, the way she makes me want to be a better man." Everett's voice was steady despite his nervousness. "I cannot promise her an easy life, but I can promise I will work every day to provide for her and protect her and make her happy." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. She reached over and took Everett's hand, not caring that it was forward of her. Martin was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Mr. Sullivan, Everett, I have watched you with my daughter these past 2 weeks. I have seen how you treat her, how you respect her opinions, how you listen to her thoughts. I have seen her happier than she has been in months, maybe years." He stood and extended his hand. "You have my blessing and my hope for both your futures." Everett stood as well, shaking Martin's hand with visible relief and joy. Then he turned to Katherine, pulling her to her feet. "Katherine Zimmerman, will you marry me? Not because of arrangements or dowries or obligations, but because I love you and cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Everett, I will marry you." Everett pulled her into his arms, right there in the parlor with her father watching, and kissed her. It was Katherine's first real kiss, and it made her dizzy with happiness and promise and the sheer rightness of it all. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Martin cleared his throat. "Well then, I suppose we have a wedding to plan. Though perhaps we should give it at least a few more weeks, let people settle down from all the excitement." "Actually, Papa, I was thinking," Katherine said, still holding Everett's hands. "What if we did something simple, something small and soon? I do not need a big ceremony or fancy dress. I just want to marry Everett and start our life together." "Are you sure?" Martin asked. "You have been dreaming of your wedding day since you were a little girl." "I was dreaming of a marriage, Papa, a real partnership with someone I love. The wedding is just one day. The marriage is what matters." Katherine looked at Everett. "What do you think?" "I think you are the wisest woman I have ever met," Everett said, his eyes shining. "And I would marry you tomorrow if I could." They settled on a date 3 weeks away, enough time to make basic preparations and to allow Everett to save a bit more money from his work with Mr. Patterson. Katherine used a small portion of her dowry to buy fabric for a simple but pretty dress, cream-colored calico with small blue flowers that matched Everett's eyes. Mrs. Henderson and Ruth insisted on helping her sew it, and the 3 women spent several pleasant evenings together working on the garment and talking about love and marriage and the future. "You know, dear, what you and Everett have is special," Mrs. Henderson said one evening as she carefully stitched the hem. "Real love, not the arranged kind, that is worth more than all the gold in the world." "I know," Katherine said softly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real. That just a month ago I was preparing to marry Thomas, and now everything has changed." "Changed for the better," Ruth added firmly. "Everett Sullivan is 10 times the man Thomas Garrett could ever hope to be. There was still the matter of their future to consider. Where would they live? How would Everett support them? These questions weighed on Katherine, though she tried not to let her worry show. She and Everett discussed it during their daily walks, trying to figure out the best path forward. "I have about $200 saved," Everett told her. "It is not much, but it is something. And Mr. Patterson has offered me permanent work at his ranch. The pay is not great, but it is steady, and he has a small cabin on the property we could use." "That is generous of him," Katherine said. They were walking along the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the mountains rose in the distance. "But do you want to be a ranch hand all your life, Everett? Is that your dream?" Everett was quiet for a moment, then shook his head. "Honestly, no. My dream has always been to have my own land, my own small ranch." Nothing fancy, just enough to raise some cattle and horses to build something that is mine. Ours, he corrected, squeezing her hand. Then why do not we work toward that? Katherine stopped walking and turned to face him. My dowry is still intact. We could use part of it to buy land to start a small ranch. It would be hard work and it would take time to build it up, but we would be working towards something of our own. Everett looked torn. Katherine, that is your money, your security. I do not want to take that from you. You are not taking anything. I am offering it. We are going to be married, Everett. What is mine will be yours, and what is yours will be mine. We are partners. Katherine reached up and touched his face. Besides, money was what almost trapped me in a loveless marriage. I want to use it for something good, something that represents our future together. Is that not a better use than letting it sit in a bank? You are sure about this? Everett asked, covering her hand with his own. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. They took their idea to Martin, who was initially hesitant but eventually agreed that it was a sound plan. Land is relatively cheap out here, and if you are willing to work hard, you can build a decent life, he said. But you should be smart about it. Find good land with water access and decent grazing, and do not spend everything. Keep enough in reserve for lean times, because there will be lean times. Everett spent the next 2 weeks talking to other ranchers and riding out to survey available land. He found a property about 5 miles south of Laramie, 160 acres with a creek running through it and good grass for cattle. The asking price was $1,500, which would leave Katherine with a substantial amount left from her dowry for building supplies, purchasing livestock, and emergency funds. It is perfect, Everett told Katherine, his excitement evident as he described it. There is a small rise where we could build a house with a view of the mountains. The creek never runs dry, even in late summer, and the land is partially fenced already, which will save us work and money. Katherine caught his enthusiasm. When can we see it? Tomorrow, if you want. I told the owner I needed to bring my intended out to see it before we make any decisions. The next day, Everett borrowed a wagon and drove Katherine and her father out to see the land. As they crested a small hill and the property spread out before them, Katherine felt her breath catch. It was beautiful in a stark, wild way. Rolling grassland dotted with scrub brush, the creek glinting silver in the sunlight, and beyond it all, the mountains rising up like sentinels. She could picture it all in her mind. A small house on the rise, a barn for animals, corrals for horses, a garden where she could grow vegetables. What do you think? Everett asked quietly, watching her face. I think it is perfect, Katherine said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. I think this is where we will build our life together. They made an offer on the land that afternoon, and by week's end, the deal was completed. Everett Sullivan and Katherine Zimmerman, not yet married, owned 160 acres of Wyoming land. It felt audacious and thrilling and slightly terrifying all at once. The week before the wedding was a flurry of activity. Everett worked with Mr. Patterson during the days, but spent every spare moment planning the ranch, making lists of supplies they would need, pricing cattle and horses. Katherine finished her wedding dress and worked with Mrs. Henderson to prepare a modest wedding breakfast to be held at the boarding house after the ceremony. Her father gave notice to the town council that he would be leaving his teaching position at the end of the school term, which was met with resignation rather than surprise. Samuel Garrett has been making noise about bringing in someone else anyway, Martin told Katherine with a wry smile. But I have been contacted by a town in Colorado that is looking for a teacher. The pay is better, and it comes with a small house. I think I will accept the position and move there after your wedding. Give you and Everett space to start your life without your old father hanging around. Papa, "You know we would never think of you as a burden," Katherine protested. "You could live with us on the ranch." "I know, sweetheart, but I think you two deserve privacy and time to build your marriage. I will only be a day's ride away. We can visit often." Martin pulled his daughter into a hug. "I am so proud of you, Katherine. You have been so brave through all of this. Your mother would be proud, too." The mention of her mother made Katherine's eyes well up. "I wish she could be here to see this." "She is here," Martin said softly. "She is always with us. And she would love Everett, I know she would." The night before the wedding, Katherine lay awake in her small room, thinking about everything that had happened in the past month. It seemed impossible that her entire life had been turned upside down and righted again in such a short time. The dowry theft that had seemed like a disaster had actually been a blessing, freeing her from a loveless engagement and bringing Everett into her life. Sometimes, she thought, the worst moments led to the best changes. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, a perfect September morning with just enough chill in the air to remind everyone that autumn was settling in. Katherine dressed carefully in her new dress, and Ruth helped her pin up her hair and fasten her mother's pearl necklace around her throat. "You look beautiful," Ruth said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Everett is going to lose his breath when he sees you." The ceremony was held at the small church at the edge of town, with Reverend Matthews officiating. The guest list was small: Martin, Mrs. Henderson and Ruth, Mr. Patterson and his wife, Sheriff Coleman and his wife, and a handful of other townspeople who had become friends over the past months. Notably absent was anyone from the Garrett family, but Katherine did not care. She did not want them there anyway. When Everett saw Katherine walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his expression was everything she could have hoped for. Awe, love, joy, wonder, all mixed together. He looked handsome in a new shirt and vest, his hair freshly trimmed, his face clean-shaven. When she reached the front of the church and Martin placed her hand in Everett's, Katherine felt a surge of absolute certainty. This was right. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. Reverend Matthews led them through the vows, and Katherine's voice was strong and clear as she promised to love and honor Everett for all her days. Everett's voice was thick with emotion as he made the same promises to her. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Everett kissed her with such tenderness that Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. The wedding breakfast at the boarding house was a joyful affair, with good food and laughter and toasts to the happy couple. Mr. Patterson surprised them by presenting them with a pair of young calves as a wedding gift, the start of their herd. Sheriff Coleman contributed a laying hen and rooster. Even Mrs. Henderson got misty-eyed as she hugged Katherine and whispered, "You deserve all the happiness in the world, dear girl." As the afternoon sun began to slant toward evening, Everett and Katherine said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon loaded with their few possessions. They were going to spend their first night as husband and wife in a tent on their land, under the stars, before beginning the work of building their ranch. The drive out to the property was quiet, both of them lost in thought and feeling. When they arrived, the setting sun was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Everett helped Katherine down from the wagon and they stood together, looking out over their land. "Are you happy?" Everett asked, pulling her close. "I am happier than I ever thought possible," Katherine answered honestly. "1 month ago, I thought my life was mapped out and I was miserable. Now I have no idea what the future holds, and I could not be more excited." "Well, I can tell you part of what the future holds," Everett said, a smile in his voice. "A lot of hard work, a lot of early mornings and long days, probably some failures along with the successes." "I am not afraid of hard work," Katherine said, "as long as we face it together." "Together," Everett agreed. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Katherine Sullivan, I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I am going to spend every day of my life proving that to you. I love you too, Everett, so much." Katherine stood on her toes and kissed him, long and sweet, as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. They set up their tent as darkness fell, working together in comfortable silence. Everett built a small fire and they sat beside it, wrapped in blankets, talking and dreaming about the future. About the house they would build, the animals they would raise, the life they would create together. "I want to name the ranch something meaningful," Katherine said as she leaned against Everett's shoulder. "Something that represents what we have found together." "What about Second Chance Ranch?" Everett suggested. "Because we both got a second chance at happiness, at building the life we really wanted," Katherine smiled. "Second Chance Ranch. I love it. It is perfect." They sat by the fire until late into the night, talking and kissing and marveling at how much their lives had changed. When they finally retired to the tent, Katherine felt no nervousness, only joy and love and anticipation for their life together. Everett was gentle and patient, and their first night as husband and wife was everything she could have hoped for. The next morning, they woke to birdsong and the sound of the creek burbling nearby. They ate a simple breakfast of bread and cheese. Then Everett drove the wagon back to town to collect more supplies while Katherine stayed on the land, walking its boundaries, getting to know every corner of the property that was now hers. Theirs. The months that followed were as challenging as Everett had predicted, but also deeply rewarding. They lived in the tent while they built a small cabin, just 2 rooms to start but solid and weatherproof. Everett did most of the heavy construction work, but Katherine helped however she could, holding boards steady, mixing mortar, painting walls. They worked from dawn until dusk most days, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. Mr. Patterson proved to be a good friend and mentor, offering advice on ranching and occasionally lending equipment or manpower when needed. Martin visited once before leaving for Colorado, and he was impressed with what they had accomplished in just a few weeks. "You two are going to make this work," he said, pride evident in his voice. "You have the determination and the love to see it through." By the time winter set in, the cabin was finished and furnished with basic necessities. They had purchased 4 more head of cattle with some of the remaining dowry money, and Everett had built a small barn to shelter the animals during the coldest months. Katherine had put in a root cellar stocked with vegetables she had bought from other farms, preparing for the long winter ahead. Their first winter together was both hard and wonderful. There were days when the snow piled so high they could not open the cabin door without shoveling. There were nights when the wind howled like a living thing and the cold was so intense they could see their breath inside despite the fire. But there were also long evenings sitting by the hearth, reading aloud to each other, talking about their plans for the ranch, making love and dreaming about the family they would have someday. Katherine learned to cook on the wood stove, to sew and mend clothes, to care for the chickens and collect eggs even in freezing weather. Everett taught her to handle a rifle and how to read the signs of changing weather. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, how to work together efficiently, when to push and when to give space. By the time spring arrived, they had settled into a comfortable partnership. The land began to green up, the cattle calved successfully, and Katherine planted a large garden full of vegetables and herbs. Everett expanded the barn and added another corral. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were building something real and lasting. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset, Katherine turned to Everett with news she had been holding close for several weeks. "Everett, I need to tell you something," He looked at her, immediately attentive. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. In fact, something is very right." Katherine took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby. In the fall, probably late October or early November." Everett's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, understanding, and then pure joy. "A baby? Really, we are going to have a child?" "Yes," Katherine said, laughing at his reaction. "Are you happy?" "Happy, Katherine, I am beyond happy. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am everything all at once." Everett pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "We are going to be parents." They sat together as darkness fell, making plans and talking about names and wondering whether they would have a son or daughter. Katherine felt a deep contentment settle over her. This life she was building with Everett, this ranch, this family, it was everything she had never known she wanted. The summer passed in a blur of work and preparation. Everett built a cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and received care packages from her father in Colorado, including a beautiful quilt that had belonged to her mother. Mrs. Henderson and Ruth visited several times, bringing gifts and advice and friendship. In late October, after a long and difficult labor attended by the local midwife, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Martin Everett Sullivan, after both their fathers, and he had a healthy set of lungs that he used frequently during his first weeks of life. Everett was a devoted father from the first moment he held his son. He would pace the cabin for hours at night, the baby against his shoulder, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until Martin fell asleep. He made silly faces to elicit gummy smiles and changed diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son, Katherine fell even more deeply in love with her husband. "You are wonderful with him," she told Everett one evening as he rocked the baby. "I want to be the kind of father I never really had," Everett admitted quietly. "I want Martin to always know he is loved, that he is wanted, that he matters." "He will know," Katherine assured him. "We will both make sure of that." The months turned into years. Second Chance Ranch grew slowly but steadily. They added more cattle, purchased a few horses, expanded the cabin to include 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. When Martin was 2 years old, Katherine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Marie, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. 2 years after that, another son arrived, Thomas Everett, called Tommy to avoid confusion with his older brother. Martin Zimmerman retired from teaching and moved to Second Chance Ranch when Martin was 5. Elizabeth was 3, and Tommy was an infant. He built himself a small cottage on the property and helped with the children and the ranch work, finally getting to be a part of his grandchildren's daily lives. "I should have done this years ago," Martin Sr. told Katherine as they watched the children playing in the yard one afternoon. "This is what life is supposed to be: family, land, purpose." "You had to find your own path, Papa, just like I did," Katherine said, leaning against her father's shoulder. "But I am glad you are here now." Everett proved to have a natural talent for ranching. He bred their cattle carefully, building a reputation for healthy stock. Other ranchers began coming to them to purchase calves. He trained horses on the side, breaking them gently and patiently, and word spread about the quality of his work. Money was never plentiful, but it was enough. They were able to hire seasonal help during busy times, to buy more land when it became available, to save for their children's futures. Katherine found joy in ways she had never expected. She loved tending her garden, watching things grow from tiny seeds into food that fed her family. She loved teaching her children to read and cipher, passing on the knowledge her father had given her. She loved the rhythm of ranch life, the changing seasons, the satisfaction of physical work well done. But most of all, she loved her life with Everett. Their love had not dimmed with time or familiarity. If anything, it had deepened, becoming richer and more complex. They still made time for each other even amidst the chaos of running a ranch and raising 3 children. They would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about their day. They would steal kisses in the barn and make love with quiet intensity in their bedroom. They were partners in every sense of the word, supporting each other through hardships and celebrating each victory together. When Martin Jr. was 8 years old, he asked his parents how they had met. They were all sitting together after dinner, the children doing lessons at the table while Katherine mended and Everett worked on repairing a bridle. "That is quite a story," Everett said, sharing a smile with Katherine. "Do you want to tell it, or should I?" "You start," Katherine said, returning his smile. Everett launched into the tale, making it dramatic and exciting for the children. He told them about the theft, about tracking the thieves through the night, about recovering the dowry. The children listened with wide eyes, and little Elizabeth gasped when Everett described confronting the thieves. "You could have been hurt, Papa," Martin said, his young face serious. "That is true, son, but some things are worth the risk." Everett looked at Katherine. "Your mother was worth any risk. But you did not even know Mama then," Elizabeth pointed out with a child's logic. "I knew enough," Everett said. "I knew she was someone special, someone worth fighting for." Katherine picked up the story from there, telling them about how their wedding had been canceled, how she had realized she did not want to marry Thomas Garrett anyway, how Everett had courted her properly. "And then we fell in love and got married and bought this ranch and built our life together," Katherine finished. "And a few years later we had you, Martin, and then Elizabeth, and then Tommy, and we have been happy every day since." "Even the hard days?" Martin asked. "Even the hard days," Katherine confirmed, "because we have each other and that makes everything better." The children seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to their lessons. Katherine caught Everett's eye across the room, and they shared a look of perfect understanding and contentment. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm. The children grew, learning to ride and rope and help with the ranch work. Martin proved to have his father's way with horses. Elizabeth inherited her grandfather's love of books and learning. Tommy was the social one, always making friends in town and charming everyone he met. When Katherine was 38 and Everett 41, with Martin approaching 13, Elizabeth 11, and Tommy 9, they sat down one evening to take stock of their lives. The ranch was thriving, the children were healthy and happy, and they had paid off all their debts. "You ever think about that day when your dowry was stolen?" Everett asked as they rocked together on the porch swing they had built the previous summer. "I do," Katherine admitted. "And I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was ruined." She laughed softly. "If someone had told me then that having my dowry stolen was the best thing that could have happened to me, I would have thought they were insane." "But it was it not?" Everett said. "It freed you from a marriage that would have made you miserable. It brought us together." "It did more than that," Katherine said thoughtfully. "It taught me what really matters, not money or social position or security, but love, real, genuine love and partnership. That day I thought I was losing everything, but actually I was being given a gift, the gift of a second chance to find real happiness." "I said it then, and I will say it now," Everett said, pulling her closer. "I do not need money for love. You have always been enough, Katherine. You and our children and this life we have built together. That is all the wealth I need." Katherine kissed him, soft and sweet, still feeling the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he kissed her all those years ago. "I love you, Everett Sullivan." I love you more than all the dowries and gold in the world. And I love you, Katherine Sullivan, always and forever." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night around them. Inside the cabin, they could hear the children's voices and Martin Sr.'s deeper tones as he helped them with their evening routines. Cattle lowed softly in the distance. A nightbird called. The creek burbled its eternal song. Katherine thought about the girl she had been, standing in the dust on a street in Laramie, watching her future disappear over a ridge. She thought about how lost and scared she had felt, how certain she had been that disaster had struck. She could never have imagined then that she would end up here, in this beautiful life, with this wonderful man and their children and their thriving ranch. Sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes. Sometimes losing everything meant gaining something infinitely more valuable. And sometimes, just sometimes, a stolen dowry and a brave cowboy were the beginning of the greatest love story of all. As the years continued to unfold, Second Chance Ranch became well known throughout the territory. Everett's reputation as an honest rancher and skilled horseman brought steady business, and Katherine's garden produced enough surplus that she began selling vegetables and preserves in town. The children grew into capable young adults who loved the ranch and the life they had there. Martin Jr., at 16, was already helping his father manage the cattle operation and showing signs of being an even better rancher than Everett. Elizabeth, at 14, had convinced her parents to let her assist at the school in town 2 days a week, following in her grandfather's footsteps. And Tommy, at 12, was learning blacksmithing from the town smith, showing an aptitude for working with metal and tools. Martin Sr. lived to see all his grandchildren reach adulthood, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, surrounded by family. His funeral was well attended, and many people spoke of his kindness, his wisdom, and his dedication to education. He was buried on a small hill on the ranch, where he could overlook the land his daughter and son-in-law had built their life on. Katherine grieved her father deeply, but she found comfort in knowing he had lived to see her happy, to be part of his grandchildren's lives, to find peace and purpose in his final years. She and Everett would often walk up to his gravesite and talk to him, sharing news and updates, feeling his presence still with them. As Katherine and Everett moved into their 40s and then 50s, they watched their children begin lives of their own. Martin married a sweet girl from town named Sarah, and they built a house on the northern section of Second Chance Ranch, continuing the family legacy. They gave Katherine and Everett 4 grandchildren over the years, 2 boys and 2 girls, who brought immense joy to their lives. Elizabeth, true to her scholarly nature, went away to a teaching college in the East, but eventually returned to Laramie, where she became the head teacher at the school her grandfather had once taught at. She married a lawyer named Daniel, and they had 3 children, all voracious readers like their mother. Tommy, the social one, surprised everyone by falling in love with ranching despite his initial interest in blacksmithing. He married a rancher's daughter named Anna, and they started their own small operation just a few miles from Second Chance Ranch. They had 2 children and often collaborated with Martin and Everett on cattle drives and sales. Katherine and Everett moved into their 60s with grace, finally able to step back from the day-to-day running of the ranch as Martin took over more responsibilities. They spent their time doting on grandchildren, tending a smaller garden, taking long rides across their land just to enjoy the beauty of it. One evening, on their 40th wedding anniversary, all their children and grandchildren gathered at Second Chance Ranch for a celebration. There was a feast, music, dancing, and laughter. As Katherine watched her family, 3 generations now connected to this land, this life, she felt overwhelming gratitude. Everett found her standing on the porch, watching the festivities through the window. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "Everything," Katherine said. "How far we have come, how blessed we have been, how that terrible day when my dowry was stolen turned out to be the best day of my life." "The day we met," Everett said. "The day everything changed," Katherine agreed. She turned in his arms to face him. His hair was now silver, his face lined with years of sun and wind, but his eyes were still the same brilliant blue she had fallen in love with. "Thank you, Everett." "For what?" "For being brave enough to ride after those thieves. For seeing me, really seeing me when no one else did. For loving me not for what I could bring to a marriage, but for who I am. For building this life with me." Katherine reached up and cupped his weathered face. "For 40 years of happiness." "The happiness has been all mine, Katherine," Everett said, his voice thick. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every day with you has been a gift." They kissed, long and tender, while inside their family celebrated and outside the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The ranch land stretched out around them, this place they had built together from nothing but love and determination and hope. Katherine and Everett lived well into their 70s, surrounded by family and love. They passed within 6 months of each other, Everett going first in his sleep after a quiet day working in the barn, and Katherine following soon after, her heart simply deciding it was time to join her beloved husband. They were buried together on the hill next to Martin Sr., under a large cottonwood tree that provided shade in summer. Their gravestone was simple: Everett Sullivan and Katherine Zimmerman Sullivan, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents together. They built Second Chance Ranch together. They found true love together forever. The ranch continued through the generations, always staying in the family, always carrying the name Second Chance Ranch. And the story of how it began, with a stolen dowry and a brave cowboy who said he did not need money for love, was passed down to each new generation. A reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected places, and that true love is worth more than all the gold in the world. Years later, Katherine's great-granddaughter would find an old leather journal tucked away in a trunk in the attic of the main house. Inside, in Katherine's careful handwriting, was the full story of that pivotal day in September 1873, when everything changed. The last entry, written shortly before Katherine's death, read, "To whoever reads this, know that a life well lived is not measured in gold or possessions, but in love shared and memories made. My dowry was stolen before my wedding day, and a cowboy told me he did not need money for love. He proved that truth every day of our 40-some years together. We built an empire not of wealth, but of family, not of property, but of love, and I would not trade a single moment of it for all the dowries in the world. If you are reading this, you are likely one of my descendants. Remember always, love is the only currency that truly matters. Choose it, fight for it, nurture it, and it will give you riches beyond measure." And so the story lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the truth that love, real and true and brave, is the greatest treasure of all. Second Chance Ranch stood as a monument to that truth, built on the foundation of a stolen dowry, a brave cowboy, and a woman who learned that losing everything can sometimes mean gaining the world. The wind still blows across those Wyoming plains, carrying with it the echoes of laughter and love, of hard work and dedication, of a family built not on obligation or arrangement but on the simple, powerful truth that when love is real, nothing else matters. The creek still flows, The cattle still graze, and somewhere in the twilight between memory and myth, two souls still dance together under the stars. Forever young, forever in love, forever grateful for the day that changed everything.